So are any of you like science fiction nerds? Anybody? Show of hands. Yeah, oh yeah. You're my people. No offense to the rest of you. I love science fiction. Probably my favorite all-time series is Dune. I've read all the Dunes the son wrote, everything. If you're super nerdy, you've read Star Wars fan fiction. Anybody read Star Wars fan fiction? Anybody want to admit it? Okay. I've read lots of Star Wars fan fiction, so I really struggle with the newer movies. I'm that guy. My boys and I, we can get going about the travesties of the Star Wars movies for hours. I love Dune. Has anybody read Isaac Asimov? Maybe you've seen I, Robot, the movie, which takes this beautiful book that Isaac Asimov wrote and crushes it into something that barely resembles an excellent book. Anyway, Isaac Asimov, so if you know anything about science fiction, you don't have most of modern science fiction without Isaac Asimov and the things that he wrote. But his big series is called Foundations. And right now, Apple TV is butchering it horribly. But it's just, so the premise of Foundations is they're in some futuristic land, and this historian mathematician discovers that the entire universe and their universe and all the planets, because in sci-fi, you don't just live in another country, you live on another planet as well, because that makes sense. And what he devises through his calculations is that all of the universe is going to come into a time where information is going to be lost and the authority structures will be in turmoil. Basically, it's going to become a backward universe for thousands and thousands of years until people figure it out again. So he goes about creating the foundation, and so he sets up a couple planets and he begins accumulating all of the knowledge that humans have to that point, which is far exceeds what we have today. And he begins basically creating these library planets where he's going to protect all of the information from the oncoming turmoil that's going to happen in this universe. Now, the reason I tell you that is because that's all based on a real place way back in history in Alexandria. Alexander, you guys remember Alexander the Great, this awesome conqueror. So you're like 300 BC, way back in the day. And he decides that you guys need to accumulate knowledge. We need to get all the knowledge of the world in one place. So he sets up the Library of Alexandria. It is this fabled place, partly fabled because we don't quite know what happened to it, and so much was lost. In the coming turmoil, we know often as the Dark Ages. So now it starts feeling like Isaac Asimov is ripping off history, which is fine. I think I learned history best through somebody's sci-fi writings. But so Alexandria is this place that is unrivaled in the world 300-ish BC, okay? And they are trying to get all the information they can from every place they can, to the point where like a ship from another land would dock at Alexandria, and they would go on board and take all of the writings that they might have, their ship logs, any scrolls or religious things. They'd take them to the library and write them down, and I'm assuming they gave back the originals, but you never know with people back then and the way they behaved towards other nations. So they're getting this awesome collection of Alexandria, and it's fabled throughout all the land of the time. And then they invited scholars to come, like great thinkers of the day to come and live there. And so they were kind of creating this whole scholarship. They literally pay people to come and live there and do research and read writings and write more. So it's this amazing place in a time when, I don't think there was a lot of education going on in the world. This place, Alexandria, was this amazing place of intellect and research and knowledge. And then things were lost. But some of the things that they had way back in 300 BC kind of blows me away. So obviously the first library catalog was developed there. There was this guy, and I'm going to butcher all of these names, but I'm going to say them with confidence so you'll think that they're right. Eratosthenes. See, that sounded right, didn't it? I think I added some letters. This guy, way back, so thousands of years ago, he calculated the circumference of the earth remarkably accurately. So I'm sorry, flat earthers, who've kind of known about the shape of the earth for a while. The videos have been entertaining, though, I'm not going to lie. There's this other guy, his name is Aristarchus. That sounded right, too, didn't it? Aristarchus of Samos, and he proposed a heliocentric model of the solar system. So basically, he kind of came up with this idea that planets revolve around a center. And everything I know from like the Middle Ages and Dark Ages, they all taught that everything revolved around the earth, right? Or that the sun would just come up and set, and they thought that the earth was flat. But thousands of years before, in this place in Alexandria, they understood and had an idea of how things really work because people were really smart. So there were these two guys, Herophilos and Aristarchus. They were two physicians who were conducting dissections on human bodies in Alexandria, and they, had an advanced knowledge of the human anatomy that was pretty much lost until the Enlightenment, because everybody thought that you were desecrating the bodies if you cut them open. And then there was this other guy. His name is Hero, which is cool. Hero of Alexandria. He wrote this book called Pneumatica, and so he understood hydraulics and pneumatics and all of these things that were lost and weren't found again for thousands of years. And that blows me away. So like the first pipe organ, a version of, it's called like what was it called? I'm going to say it wrong. The hydraulis. But it was this pipe organ that ran on air. In fact, if you watch the Sci-Fi Channel, which there are fringe historians that are like, we think they had like pneumatic lifts in the Library of Alexandria to haul all the scrolls around, and I like to think that maybe that was true. Okay, why am I telling you all about this? Because we are doing this series. And I love talking to Pastor about this guy named Apollos. So Pastor is in my office this week. He goes, man, I'm like totally inspired by this guy named Apollos. So we've been looking at him for a couple weeks, and we're going to continue. So if we look at Acts 18:24 through 28, I'm just going to read, because Apollos, there's not a lot about him. We're going to look at most of the things that are said about Apollos today. It says, meanwhile, a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus. He was a learned man with a thorough knowledge of the Scriptures. He had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and he spoke with great fervor and taught about Jesus accurately. Though he knew only the baptism of John, he began to speak boldly in the synagogues. When Priscilla and Aquila heard him, and they were other believers, they invited him to their home and explained to him the way of God accurately. When Apollos went to go to Achaia, The brothers and sisters encouraged him and wrote to the disciples there to welcome him. When he arrived, he was a great help to those who by grace had believed, for he vigorously refuted his Jewish opponents in public debate, proving from the scriptures that Jesus was the Messiah. So here comes Apollos. And we don't know for sure, but I picture Apollos, a learned person in the library, gathering all this information and knowledge. And no doubt they had copies of the Hebrew scrolls, because that's what they would have done. And he studies them, and he discovers God through them, and his heart is changed. And even though he still had things to learn, he went off. And he's like, all right, I got to tell people about this. I've discovered something. And I've got to tell people what's going on. It says, even though he had all that learning, he still had things to learn. It says that he had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and he spoke with great fervor and taught about Jesus accurately. Though he knew only the baptism of John, he began to speak boldly in the synagogue. So Apollos' teaching, by the time he gets to this area, to Corinth, his teaching's a little outdated. It's not wrong. He just hasn't heard all the cool stuff that has happened with Jesus up to this point. So Aquila and Priscilla, they fill him in, because a lot happened since John in those few years. It didn't stop him, though. Not having all the facts, all the knowledge didn't stop him. God changed his heart, and he went. God changed his heart, and he went. Sometimes I think about, we're talking about this walk through the Bible and learning the scriptures. And man, do I think it's important that we know the scriptures. But if God has changed your heart, and you've met Jesus, and you begin to pursue him through study and through prayer, what are you waiting for? What are we waiting for? Are we waiting until we understand all the vastness of the entire scriptures? I don't know anybody who's got that completely licked. Apollos, armed with the knowledge he had, went forth and proclaimed the Messiah. God is ready to use you no matter where you are in your faith journey. You don't have to have all the answers. You can say this. If somebody comes up to you and is asking you about your faith or Christianity, you can say this: I don't know. Like, not knowing all the answers it's okay. Or you can say, I'm not sure. Because, if you put me on the spot, I'm just going to start making stuff up, and who knows what's coming out. I'm really bad on the spot. If you come like in a debate setting, I just and then 3 hours later I'm like, ha. But it's a little late. That's what's most things in my brain. So a couple of years ago, our small group went through this book called Rediscover Discipleship, and the author, Paul Galati, he's talking about discipleship, and when are you ready to disciple someone else? And he tells the story. He's got this new Christian, and this new Christian's like halfway through Matthew. He's read halfway through Matthew, and he goes, all right, I need you to disciple this guy. He just started Matthew, so you can work with him together. Like, I love that picture. No matter where you're at in your faith journey, you've got something to pass on to someone else. You have something in you that someone else doesn't have. You have a hope that someone else doesn't have. You have eternity with him that someone else doesn't have. What are we waiting for? Now, I say, what are you waiting for? That's me too. What am I waiting for? We are so afraid of getting it wrong that we never give God a chance to get it right. We're so afraid of getting it wrong that we never give God a chance to get it right. And you've been in those situations, right? Where you feel God is like, hey, just go talk to that person. Like, no way. I don't know that person. He's going to think I'm weird. Maybe give God a chance. I know I've always been afraid of like the theology police. You know what I'm talking about. I love that people want to understand the Word of God and want to figure out what God is teaching us, because it's difficult sometimes. And we learn from others, but I don't want to be so afraid of getting it wrong that I can't have those discussions and I can't ask those questions. Maybe sometimes I'm just afraid of looking stupid, because I'm thinking, well, shoot, by this time I should know that by now, so I'm just going to keep my mouth shut so everyone thinks I'm smarter than I am. That's what the fellowship of believers is for, though. Because if you're thinking it, you might, and you have a question, you might as well say it and either get confirmation or, hey, well, have you thought about it this way? I don't want us to be afraid of getting out there and being bold and being courageous. And I'm not talking about standing on the street corner. I'm just talking about talking to your neighbor and talking to your coworker and talking to other believers. I don't want us to be afraid. I want us to be bold like Apollos. Now you might say, well, Apollos was kind of the man. I mean, it literally says, for he vigorously refuted his Jewish opponents in public debate, proving from the scriptures that Jesus was the Messiah. So like Apollos would go out, and he was like Charlie Kirk in it, okay? He's just stacking up people and knocking them down, like next person up to the microphone, boom, and I'm like, wow, I can't do that. Like that's a skill. I don't have that skill. And yeah, you might be saying, yeah, good for you, Apollos. I can't do that. Not good at that. And you think of all these, there's all these preachers out there, these amazing speakers that have huge churches, and they're like, wow, they are really good. This week I was at Brown City Camp for a few days, and I got to sit under some excellent preaching, and I'm going, wow, these guys are good. I can never do what they're doing. Here's the thing. God has enough stars. We got plenty of stars in the American church. We are obsessed with celebrity Christians. I'm obsessed with celebrity Christians. I'll hear the next guy and I'm like, oh man, this guy's awesome. And I got to hear everything he says. And then I got to get his books. And then a few years later, you find out he was a total fraud. And turns out he had all these deep, dark secrets. Like I'm telling 20 stories, right, that you can think of over the past 30 to 40 years of celebrity preachers that totally biff it. And so then everyone just assumes, well, that guy's a sham. Christianity must be a sham. We got enough stars. We've got enough excellent debaters. We've got enough excellent speakers. God doesn't need your strengths. He doesn't need the thing you're good at. He doesn't. Kind of doesn't need me at all. He will use the things you're good at. Not saying he doesn't want to use the things you're good at, but he doesn't need more stars. Where God is best is in your weakness. His strength is made perfect in your weakness. I don't need God in my strengths. I got it all together. I got it. But then when he asks me to do something that I feel vulnerable and weak at, then it has to be God, because I really can't do it. And so when I was going to school at the Moody Bible Institute for ministry, I'm like, I don't want to speak in front of people. I don't mind singing in front of you. I don't mind teaching the youth. But this right here is a scenario I never wanted to find myself in. And we had all these we had a speech class in our curriculum, and we had preaching classes, and I was terrified of those. So what I did is I would take those classes in the short summer semesters, so you could literally do the entire preaching class in 2 weeks over the summer with less people. And I'm like, all right, I can knock it out. I can have 2 weeks of puking in the bathroom from nerves, speaking in front of these guys just for 2 weeks, and then I'll get it out of the way. And here we are. I really don't like reading in front of people. I can jack my jaw all day, but man, reading in front of people is really hard for me. God's like, hey, why don't you do this preaching thing? Read the scripture and then talk about it. I'm like, man, it's all the things I don't like. Well, yeah, I appreciate that. God doesn't need my strengths. God doesn't need your strengths. My weakness is where God reveals his power. So there's this wonderful story in the book of Judges, this guy named Gideon. So Israel has been conquered by the Midianites, so they're under the rule of the Midianites. And God calls Gideon. He says, I'm going to raise you up to lead my people to conquer the Midianites. Ha ha! So Gideon, he answers the call. He assembles this army. And he's got 22,000 men, and they're going to go up against the Midianites. And God says, hey, Gideon, this army you've got, they look great. You've got too many. I mean, when all you do is go and like stab the other guy, it seems like you want to have more guys than the other people stabbing you. Like, so numbers seem like a pretty important thing going into ancient battle. God says, Gideon, you got too many guys. So go to them and say, whoever's afraid, whoever's like, man, I don't really want to do this, tell them they can go home, no shame, all right? No harm, no foul. So he does that, like, all right, guys. And that 22,000 number army drops to 10. And I can just imagine Gideon going, I mean, can't you just feel like his heart sinking as people walk away? I mean, that's more than half of them, or they're just walking away, and you're like, God. All right, God, are we good now? Like, this army, it's like an army-yet now. And God looks at Gideon, and he's like, yeah, Gideon, there's still too many people. When you conquer the Midianites, you're just going to say that you did it in your own power. So shrink it again. Okay. How do you want me to do it this time? He says, all right, everybody's going to go down to the river and drink. The people that drink this way from the river, they can leave. And the people who drink from the river this way, you keep them. It's like, all right. Well, apparently there was a real fad on how to drink out of the river because there were 300 people left. 300 people left after that. And God's like, all right, Now we're cooking. So they come up with this plan. The Midianites are camped down in this valley. And he has the 300 people. They get a trumpet and they get a jar and they put the torch in a jar. Hey, what about my sword? No, trumpet and a jar. So I'm picturing like marching band people, right? So they go up and they've got their torch in a jar so that it's hidden, okay? And at night they surround the Midianite army. And then at the signal, they blow their trumpets from all around, and they break their jars so that they see 300 torches. Well, if there's 300 torches, they figure for every torch, there's like a whole lot of people there. So they're waking up, they're freaking out, and the Midianites basically end up in the dark stabbing each other. So they kind of kill themselves accidentally, and then whatever's left, they flee. God's strength is revealed in that moment in that story because it didn't do it with military might and prowess and skills. They accomplished this great victory by trusting in God. And that thing that he did was made perfect in their weakness. All right, so far I got one more point. We don't have to know everything to tell the good news, right? We don't have to be gifted like Apollos for God to use us. And then finally, 1 Corinthians 3:6. So this is the other place in the Bible where Apollos is mentioned. And apparently the church in Corinth, this is Paul writing, they were divided amongst themselves into factions based on who baptized them. So some people were saying, well, I'm of Paul, and I'm of Apollos, and I'm of Cephas, who's Peter. That's the Aramaic version of Peter. So they're all saying that my baptism is more right, and my group is better. And that's crazy, because I've just never heard of Christians breaking into factions and arguing with each other. So Paul says this. He says, he's talking about our place in the work of Christ. And he's like, I planted this seed. Apollos watered it. But God gave the growth. What is he saying? He's saying that Peter has a role in God's kingdom, and Paul has a role in God's kingdom, and Apollos has a role in God's kingdom in bringing kingdom living to this earth. But who does the work? God. God does the work. It is God who gives the growth. You can have all the Bible education. You can be the most talented preacher or musician or debater, or you can be the most persuasive person on the planet defending the faith. But it is God who gives growth. It is God who changes hearts. It is God who gives the increase. It is God who forgives. It is God who has the power of the cross. I think you should know the Word. I think we should be fervently studying the Word. Don't hear me say that. I think you should be ready to give an answer for your faith in any time, in any place. I think you should be ready for that. And if you're not, ask somebody, like, how do I do this? But if you want to see lives change, if you want to see church growth, if you want to see people healed, then we better get on board with what God is doing and what He would have us do. And I think that comes down to meeting with God and pleading with God in prayer. Again, I will say, if you call yourself a Christian and you're not a student of the Word, I don't know what you're doing. There's no coasting in Christianity. You don't like get on this plateau and like, I'm good now. No. Because in heaven, we're going to spend an eternity growing in our relationship with an infinite God. What are we waiting for? And I think we go into this world as a church, and we're trying to prepare each other for ministry. And so the way we approach ministry is, well, you got to know all the right stuff, right? I mean, that's kind of how we do it. If you know all the right stuff and you can say all the right things and you have all the right answers, then you're ready to go and you should see fruit. But I read this passage, and what does it say? It says, God gave the growth. And as a church, I think we often forget to employ God in the ministry of the church. In our small group, we've been going through Mark, and there's that moment where Jesus is asking his disciples, who do you say that I am? And some say that I'm Elijah, and who do you say that I am? And it says this, Simon Peter replied, you are Christ, the Son of the living God. Peter gets it. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. So Peter didn't figure it out as the right arguments. He didn't figure it out because he heard the best defense. He figured out who Jesus was because God revealed it to him. So then I start thinking, how would I behave different? How would we behave different as a community of believers, as the church, if we truly, really believed that it is God who gives the growth, if it is God who gives the increase? It is God who changes minds. It's God who changes hearts. What would it look like around here? How would it change? What does a praying church look like? Now listen, I'm not saying that you guys aren't praying. I don't want you to hear me just punching y'all. But what if we prayed as one mind? What if we prayed in unity of purpose? What if we asked God for increase? What if we asked God to touch people's hearts and change minds? What if we asked God to reveal himself to my neighbor? What if we asked Jesus to reveal himself to those we come in contact with? What if we asked God to do a work like here, now, in this place? I'm going over, but I just tell this one story. So this past week I listened to, I love podcasts. I love listening to how God is using other people. And the preacher who preached at the Asbury Revival just a couple of years ago, or the Awakening, they're calling it. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And I remember when this happened, I think it was like 2 years ago at Asbury College down in Kentucky. And I'm going to mess up his name because I didn't put it in my notes and my brain doesn't work. His name is Andy Meek something. And I remember when this was happening, and I don't know if you remember, it started with like 16 people coming forward after a message, and then it turned into hundreds and thousands of people coming to this place to see what God is doing. And in this podcast, this preacher, he says, I literally saw like tumors disappearing on people's faces, okay? And I'm listening to this going, holy cow, now he sounds crazy. And I remember going back and listening to this sermon because I'm like, this must have been the sermon of sermons to start this. I think it lasted for 16 days before the president of the college was like, we got to do college. We got to do class here, so we need to disperse this thing and move it. So I'm listening to this sermon, and I'm waiting for that, like, wow moment. It never happens. It wasn't a bad sermon. I think it was super chill. Taught some good scripture. And when he talks about it afterwards, he's like, yeah, I felt like I really preached a dud, and I was tired, and I was ready to get home. I was ready to get out of there. And then people were praying, and they just didn't stop. And he's like, well, I guess I got to stick around here even though I'm really ready to go. And he says he was so humbled by that. And as he just dug into, well, what was going on here? Well, what he found out is there was all kinds of people, churches in that area, professors who have been praying for a move of God and asking for it for years. For years. And then God shows up and he does remarkable things. I see little inklings of God doing remarkable things here. And I'm ready for him to knock my socks off. So we're going to have the band come up. I'm definitely long. But we're just going to reprise that last song. So I'm going to say that you're dismissed. But maybe from your seat, you can pray to God. And you can say, God, how can you use me in my job? How can you use me amongst the body of believers? How can you use me with my neighbors? How can you make your strength perfect in my weakness, Lord? How can you use me to further your kingdom on this planet? That's our prayer this morning.